Greetings, my name is Kerry and welcome back to my channel. Today I have for you my July reading stats. So July was a pretty good reading month. I read a total of 9 books, in the loosest interpretation of the word books, in a couple of circumstances, but I will get onto that in a minute. And they were all 4 or 5 stars, so I mean that is fairly solid really as reading months go. I'm going to start with my Goodreads TBR stat for you, because I usually forget to do that. At the start of July, there were 589 books on my Goodreads TBR. By the end of the month, this had gone up slightly. It had gone up to 591. That is mainly because my dad was having a clear out and gave me a load of books. So I didn't actually buy very many. I only bought a couple. I had a couple of pre-orders arrive. But yeah, my dad gave me quite a lot of books. But I did also unhaul a lot of books. I filmed a couple of unhaul videos that you probably won't have seen yet. In preparation for moving at the beginning of September, I'm having a bit of a clear out myself. Most of my books will be packed up and going into storage, so I'm going to try and weed out some of the ones that actually I'm not that fussed about ahead of time, so that I'm not storing too many books at my parents' house. I'm going to just take the ones that are sort of highest priority for me to college with me when I go. That was not too bad. It could have been slightly better. It does bother me slightly when it goes up, not down, but my new system for helping me buy less books seems to be working, because I had these 2 pre-orders arrive, but that was the only books I actually bought apart from the books for book club for July and August. So I read 9 books. That was from 7 different authors. So I read 3 books by one author, which was Lauren James. One of the books I read by her was The Last Beginning, which is the second book in a duology, but there were also a number of novellas and short stories that are linked to this book, and one of them, a very short story you get from signing up to her email newsletter. So I did that, and that was 1 page, but it's listed on Goodreads as a book, so I counted it, and more reference to that will come later. And then also she serialised a novel in blog format called An Unauthorised Fan Treatise, and so I read that too. Again, that was listed on Goodreads as a book, so I counted it. The shortest book I read was that short story from Lauren James called Galloway, which I counted as being 1 page because that was about all it was. And then the longest book I actually finished, finally. It's taken me 4 months, but I got there in the end. I finished Ducks Newburyport by Lucy Ellmann. This is 1,030 pages, and I got to the end of it, and I'm so happy that it's finally done. I'm going to give more of my thoughts on it in a recent reads video that I'm going to be filming a little bit later, so I will tell you more about that there. In terms of how much I earn from my books, I explained in my last video that I now have this budgeting system where I earn money for every book that I read, so I earn £1 per book. But if the book is over 500 pages, then it goes up to £2, and if it's over 1,000 pages, then it goes up to £3. 7 books that I read were less than 500 pages. I read 1 book that was over 500 pages and 1 book that was over 1,000 pages, so I earned £12 this month. Because I had those 2 pre-orders arrive that I'd ordered previously, but they were from Amazon, so I didn't pay for them until they were dispatched. One of those books came out of the money I earned in June, and the other one came out of the money I earned in July. One of them was The Cursed Hunter by Bethany Atazadeh, which was £9.75. The other one was Cinderella is Dead by Kaylin Bayron. I think I've said that right, sorry if I haven't. And that one cost me £7.99, so I earned £8 in June and £12 in July, which has left me with a total of £2.26 to carry over to the end of August. My birthday is in September, so I probably won't actually buy any books at the end of August. I will probably wait till after my birthday before I buy anything, so any amount I earn in August will also carry over, and then I'll have a little bit of spending money after my birthday. Okay, yeah, so I said about the page numbers, so I had a total page count for the month of 3,308, so I didn't necessarily read all those pages within the month because some of the books had taken me a couple of months to get through, but that is the total number of pages in the books that I finished in the month, which gave me an average per book of 367.5 pages. Of the books that I read, 8 of them were published in the 21st century and 1 was published in the 20th century. I read 9 books, so I gave 4 books 5 stars and 5 books 4 stars, just to confuse myself. The book that took me the longest to read was, unsurprisingly, Ducks Newburyport, which took me 128 days. So it was just over 4 months, so I started it at the end of March. And the book that took me the quickest to read was, unsurprisingly as well, Galloway by Lauren James, which was 1 page, so it took me about a minute, maybe 2. But if I found it really varied actually this month. The books either had taken me a really long time to get through, or I read them really quickly. So an average length of time it took me to read was 41 days, which was inflated by 2 books taking me a really long time, and then the rest didn't take me very long at all. The book that had been on my TBR the longest was Paradoxology by Krish Kandiah. This had been on my TBR, this is awful, for 1,960 days. Yeah, so this was one of the oldest books on my TBR, so it was good that I finally got to it. The lights do not like this cover. And then there were quite a few books that I actually started reading straight away, yeah, for various reasons. But there were quite a few books I started reading on the day that I added them to my Goodreads, so I'm not going to go through all of them. So in terms of whether they were on my TBR or not, this is a really bad thing. This is the bit that I'm actually a little bit cross at myself for. Only one book was on my July TBR, which was City of Brass by S.A. Chakraborty. This I was buddy reading, and yeah, that was the only one of the books that I finished that was on my July TBR. I am still reading a couple of them. I'm saying that I have one book that I'm currently reading that was also on my TBR, but I didn't finish it. But then actually the rest of them I didn't get to at all. If I have time, I might pick them up in August, but I also have a lot of books out from the library that I need to finish because I'm moving in September. So whether I will actually get to them or not this month, I don't know. They may go on another future TBR. I will read them at some point, I just didn't manage to get to any of them this month. So the other books, 3 books were actually featured on my June TBR, all 3 of them, because that month I did a currently reading thing, and they were books that I had started at the end of May, and they've taken me just a little while to get through. And then 2 of the books, which were the 2 library books, were on my May TBR, which was predominantly made up of books that I had out from the library at the time. I feel like I've made that sound really complicated, but the point being, when 3 books weren't on my TBR at all, I just randomly picked them up because I do that. This is another stat that is I'm slightly disappointed about, to be honest, as well, because I only read 1 book from my own TBR in July, which again was Paradoxology. I read 3 books that I got out from the library, and then the other 5 books were new. So 2 of them were the 2 Lauren James ones that I've mentioned earlier, were kind of ebooks, and then there were 3 books that I bought this year. So it is good that I'm reading the books that I have bought this year to justify buying them, but I need to be reading more books from my own TBR. And actually, because August I'm mainly going to be reading library books, like that probably won't be going down very much in August. Okay, so I read 3 ebooks and then the rest were paperbacks. In terms of genres, I read 2 fantasy, 2 science fiction, 1 Christian non-fiction and 1 regular non-fiction, 1 mystery, 1 contemporary, and 1 short story anthology. 4 of the books were in the YA category and the rest were adult books. I read a variety of publishers. I did read 4 books from independent publishers or self-published books, which I'm quite pleased with. I read mainly British and American authors. 1 author was British Indian and 1 was Pakistani American. And I did also read 1 book from a Kenyan author for my read around the world. That was Secret Lives and Other Stories by Ngūgī wa Thiong'o, who is quite a prolific Kenyan writer and essayist, so I'm looking forward to picking up more books by him. That was a book I managed to get from the library as an ebook, and they have quite a lot of his other books on there, so I want to try and read more of them. I did read a range of author ethnicities as well, so 5 of the books were from white British or white American authors, and then the others were from a mixture of different ethnicities from different continents and different ethnic backgrounds. So I read 7 books from cisgendered women and 2 from cisgendered men, and this was one thing I was a little bit cross with myself because I had 2 books on my TBR from non-binary authors and it was transathon and I didn't get round to them. I didn't have time because I had so many books that were on my currently reading shelf that had been ongoing for so long that I wanted to try and finish them. It meant that I didn't actually manage to pick those ones up. So for my challenges, I read 4 books that counted towards the Indie Challenge. I read 1 book towards Start on Your Shelfathon, which was also one of the oldest books on my TBR. And I also read 1 book for Read Around the World, which was for Kenya, as I already mentioned. Okay, so in terms of my author diversity markers, 4 of the books were from authors of colour, authors from marginalised ethnicities, and 3 of the books were from authors from the LGBTQ+ community. Those were the only diversity markers that I hit for authors this month, as far as I could tell from what I could find out about the authors from what they say about themselves on their social media or on their author websites. And then for the character diversity, I managed to hit all of those markers, so marginalised ethnicity, LGBTQIA+, disability, mental health and neurodiversity rep. Managed to hit all of those at least once. In fact, I hit all of them at least twice, which I was pretty happy about. Yeah, so that's all the stats. I couldn't really pick a worst book again this month because all of these books were 4 or 5 stars, so it doesn't feel fair to say that any of them was any worse than any of the others. As I'm not talking about a least favourite book, I'm going to talk about 2 books that I really loved instead, because I can. So the first book I'm going to talk about was The City of Brass by S.A. Chakraborty. I was buddy reading this with some other booktubers. We all really loved it. I think we all agreed it took a little while to get into. It was quite slow paced at the start, but I was really drawn to particularly Nari as the main character. The other point of view character, Ali, was maybe I didn't like him too much to start with, but by the end of the book I really did care about him and what happened to him. And sort of once I got past about 100 pages, the pace really started to pick up and I was really drawn in, particularly to all the court politics. Found that really intriguing. There was so much in here, so much world building, and just left me really intrigued. The story did resolve to an extent, but left enough that made me really want to pick up the next book, so that is on my August TBR, which hopefully you've seen already. We're again buddy reading it with the same other booktubers, so I will link all their channels below for you. If you don't know much about the plot, I think it is talked about quite a lot on BookTube, but it certainly seems to be quite a popular series, and the third one has recently come out. This follows the story of Nari, who has grown up on the streets of Cairo. She doesn't know anything about her parents or where she came from. She knows she has slightly weird abilities, like she can understand any language after hearing it and she can self-heal, but she manages to keep that to herself, and she kind of works as somewhere between a healer and a con woman depending on how wealthy the people that come to her for help are. And then one day she accidentally summons a djinn and her life kind of unravels a little bit from there, and she finds herself taken to the city of Daevabad and gets drawn into all the court politics there. So really enjoyable first book to a series. I'm really excited to see how the series develops. Okay, and then the other book I'm going to talk about. This book took me a couple of months to get through, but that was because I was savouring it and really trying to take it all in. This was Invisible Women by Caroline Criado Perez. This is a non-fiction book and it's about gender data bias and the gap in data about women's experience. It looks at various different aspects of society, things like medical profession, product design, that sort of thing, and how when the views of women aren't consulted in designing those things or in providing those services, the needs of women are often not being met. Some of it was really like basic stuff, like the size of phones, for example. Most modern phones, handsets are too big for women's hands to fit comfortably, which is why I drop my phone all the time, because my phone is too big for my hand. But then some of it was more complex stuff, so like there was a section about medicines, and the majority of medicines aren't tested on women, so they often prove to be really ineffective or actually sometimes actively harmful to women, but because they're only tested on men, it's not known at the time. So that's how things like the whole thalidomide scandal happened, because those products weren't tested thoroughly enough on women. Things like disaster relief, and if people are ending up in refugee centres or in shelters because they've been made homeless by natural disasters, then women are put at greater risk because things like adequate toilet facilities or adequate lighting or even having separate spaces for men and women aren't considered, so that puts women at greater risk of harm from the men in the shelter. Things that to me seem really obvious, like when they're rebuilding houses after natural disasters, if women aren't consulted, often those houses don't end up with kitchens. So I don't know how the people building them think people are going to eat, but never mind. So this book made me really angry when I was reading it, because there's so much stuff in here that is just really, it's common sense to women, but clearly not to men. And if women aren't consulted, then so much that happens really negatively affects them. So she talked a bit about the effect of austerity in the UK after the 2008 financial crash and how that affected women more than men, because the services that were cut, women ended up performing a lot of unpaid labour as a result of services that they needed being cut. because they were considered not essential services. So many things, because I was reading this book during a time of lockdown, and as lockdown restrictions were starting to be lifted, it was very clear that there weren't enough women being involved in those conversations in the government, because the decisions being made were clearly going to negatively affect women more than men, and so much about lockdown restrictions is the same, negatively affected women predominantly more than men. So this book is excellent. My favourite chapter in it actually talked about the myth of meritocracy, which is often a line that is used by people in power to explain away why people that are different from them, i.e. not cis white men, aren't getting the same opportunities, and they're like, well, we only pick the best people. But the chapter on meritocracy in here really debunks that myth. So I found that really interesting, and she also talks quite a lot about other forms of discrimination as well, so racial bias and that sort of thing, and how that is linked to gender data bias as well. Yeah, it was just really, really interesting. If you think that sexism doesn't exist, similarly to when I was talking about white rage last month, this book does a similar thing, but in terms of gender imbalance that white rage did about racial inequality, this is a similar thing about gender inequality. So if you don't believe in gender inequality, you definitely need to read this book. So that was my stats for July. I forgot what month we were in then. Let me know how many books you read in July and what was your favourite. Let me know some of the books you're hoping to get to in August. Please also like this video if you liked it, and please subscribe if you haven't already. And you can also follow me on my social media. All that information will be listed in the description box below for you. But that's it for today, so thank you so much for watching, and I will talk to you again soon. Bye!